Well, thank you again, young man, for helping us fix the litany of issues that have been going on.
Well, hopefully it's all smooth sailing from now then.
Oh, it's way more fun if it's not.
I'll be within earshot.
Yeah.
All right.
All right then. Have a nice chat.
Thank you, Will. Thanks, son.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, not too bad, thank you.
Yeah,
It's good to see you.
For people who are just now joining in the standard actual interview and chat, we just spent 30 minutes bonding over technical problems, which I think was a great way to set the energy, set the tone. Truly wonderful.
We are brothers now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another author interview here today. I am delighted to say that I am joined by the fantastically blown up since we last had an interview author, John Gwynne, author of The Fury of the Gods, which hit shelves, not just one, I would say many shelves, last month. How has the launch of this one been going for you?
Oh, amazingly, thanks, Daniel. I'm really blown away by how people have just taken to the Bloodsworn and particularly Fury of the Gods. It's just been beyond my expectations, really. It's been lovely. I've had a UK book tour, which has, just been really fabulous. I've met so many readers, and it's gone really well in the States and Canada. So everything's been great with the launch, really.
I have never been on a book tour, and you said it went through the States, Canada, and the UK.
Sorry, no. The book tour was just in the UK, organised by my UK publishers, but the book was published in North America and UK at the same time. So it's been doing really well in the US and Canada as well.
I have noted that several of my friends have actually picked up the Bloodsworn Saga without even my usual bugging them to do so. And when I ask them almost every single time, it's just because big dragon, big wolf, big serpent. And it's been an incredible rollout for a series in terms of just seeing people not only pick this up, but then go back and start reading books like Malice. Have you seen a resurgence in your full catalog? I haven't talked to an author who's kind of had that like second series pop off before, so I'm curious how that kind of trail backwards has gone.
Yeah, that's definitely happened. I mean, the Bloodsworn Saga, it's really since Shadow of the Gods came out. It's kind of been spiking renewed interest in the Banishland series, the Faithful and the Fallen, which has been lovely to see. I think I don't know, something about the way, maybe it was just as simple as the cover art, but something caught the attention with the Bloodsworn Saga, and obviously people like your good self shouting about it really helped a lot. But it seemed to bring in readers, and then those readers that enjoyed that series, many of them have gone on to go back to my first series and give that a go. So yeah, absolutely seeing a kind of an increase in interest and popularity for the first series as well, which is really lovely to see.
I remember saying this either in one of our first interviews or in one of my first reviews of your books. I said one of the most underrated authors out there right now, and I'm happy to say, at least from my perspective, John, it seems you're properly rated now.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. Thank you. And I think you've had quite a lot to do with that, so I'm really grateful.
No. But I did want to ask before we get. I have a litany of Patreon questions to get into because it's a really exciting time for your career right now. But before we get into these more really thoughtful, nuanced questions from your fans, I was curious. We've gotten the Fury of the Gods, the Hunger of the Gods, the Shadow of the Gods. Cozy fantasy is very popular right now. Have you thought about just the God's Very Nice Day? Or, the nap of the gods? Has any of that ever kind of floated around? Or
yeah, I mean that would never happen in my world, I don't think. No.
Got it. So gods have to have bad days. I understand. So you have this series, before we get into the Bloodsworn Saga, come to a conclusion. And inevitably, I'm sure you've already been asked a million times, what do you plan on doing next? What's the next, foray for you as an author? But I'm actually kind of curious. Do you have any projects that kind of have been sitting on your back burner for a long time that you've been itching to get to, but maybe it's still not the right time for? Like, could we see a John Gwynne cyberpunk book, necromancy book, anything along those lines?
I mean, it's funny. I have kind of a queue of ideas in my head of projects to do. Nothing cyberpunk, strangely. All my stuff is kind of rooted in mythology and ancient history, so that's kind of where my head is with my projects. But I've got 3 or 4 that I think about a lot. Really, it's down to time management. And the next one, I am working on, pretty close to starting writing for the next project. I mean, I know you're aware, Daniel, my daughter died, Harriet,
Yeah.
3 years ago now. So I stopped everything for a good long time, kind of fell off the world for a while. And at that point, I wasn't even sure if I would write anything again, not even Fury. It's been a long road to get back to this point.
Yeah.
And actually, I wanted to say thank you to you personally for the kind messages you sent to me, in the midst of that awful time. And I've had so many beautiful messages from readers, really, that have just been kind of little sources of light in a very dark time. So, thank you for that, Daniel. And if anyone who's watching this is one of those people that's messaged, I'm really grateful. So yeah, I have managed to kind of get back to writing. It's not that you don't get over something like this. I miss Harriet every day, but you can't do. Well, I have learned to live with the pain somehow and kind of start to function again. And got back to writing end of last year, and wrote Fury of the Gods. But I've had really very soon after Harriet died, I had just a little spark came to me, and that's what my next project is going to be. I can't say too much about it because my publishers want to kind of do it, do the big this is what's coming next thing, but it will be what I do, which is focused on a world mythology, focused on a specific historical period, but it will be really inspired heart and soul by Harriet at the center of it. So that's the next project, and I'm knee deep in the research for it at the moment. So hopefully I'll be starting to write fairly soon.
That's beautiful to hear, and that's such a personal part of art. But I'm thrilled to hear that you're able to transform that emotion in that way. And I don't want to get too much into these heavier subjects if you're uncomfortable, but I've lost people close to me as well, and it's death is something that it never hits the same person the same way twice. It brings out emotions they make no sense. Yeah. I remember being very angry for a long time, and I couldn't figure out why. There's so much. And so, it seems like you found a good way to kind of channel that. Would you say that's a good way to put it, or is it a different kind of expression?
Yeah. And just having good people around me has helped me, my wife, Caroline, and my boys, my 3 sons. And it is, writing. When I sat down to write Fury, I was really nervous because I thought I haven't written a word for 3 years. I don't feel like the same person. So I was quite nervous when I sat down, but actually, as soon as I started writing, it just poured out. It was really quite cathartic in a way.
Yeah. And
so, I was relieved at that I can still hopefully write. I think writing is just something that feels part of me. So I think it will always be. It was almost like an escape as well, going into another world and just focusing on my character's pain rather than my own, I suppose.
You struck on something there I find fascinating, where you said, you felt like you were a different person coming to write it. Do you think your fans should expect the authorial voice in this book to be a bit different, or do you think it's just kind of you're in the same voice, but your approach is different?
So I think, I feel like it came out, in a similar voice, but hopefully, I brought some more depth to the table. Especially kind of have a new understanding of grief, and loss. Obviously, being the last book in an epic fantasy series, there is grief and loss for the characters involved. So, hopefully I brought some of that to the table as well.
And I saw your recent interview with Patrick, and I believe in that interview. First of all, great interview from you and Tim, as always. But I believe you said in that interview you got it done in about 6 months.
Yeah, well, probably less than that. It's the quickest book I've written. I kind of sat down and started working on it, and by the time I finished it, that was probably a 6-month period. But the bulk of the writing really happened in probably 4 months. So It's by far the fastest book I've written.
That is like Stephen King levels right there, man. Yeah. That is impressive. So you just had this new focus, and is that something that, do you think it was because it was a third book in a series, or is it just a mindset coming into it where you just decided to hack at it like a warrior?
I mean, it definitely helped that it was a third book, because everything was all the kind of the hard work, the heavy lifting had been done in terms of the world building and the character building and the plot arcs moving towards the final moments. So it was all kind of there for me. I didn't have to work any of that stuff out, which was really helpful. So that really helped.
And I want to make it clear to people watching: this is a beefy book. This could be a weapon.
Yeah, it's not a small book. But I just think, I don't know. A lot of factors came together, I guess, that just it just poured out. It was almost like it was very intense. I had a different work schedule, and I'd start in the morning when it's dark, and I'd finish at night when it's dark. That's not usually my work routine.
No, I can't do that at all. I take 3-hour breaks that are supposed to be 15-minute breaks.
That's my usual. Yeah, it was just a different kind of intensity to the focus this time around, I think.
And so I asked my Patreon what questions they had, because I'm only about halfway through Fury of the Gods, if I'm being honest. And also, we need to avoid spoilers. So I wanted to get, from the fandom, the people who maybe are still catching up, so we're avoiding getting all that done. What do they have to ask you? And immediately I got asked, and I sent you an email so you could prepare for this, what books that you've consumed recently have inspired you? What books have meant a lot to you for your own kind of creative process? And I believe you sent me a title.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So one of my, whenever I kind of think about the people or the books that, and all, growing up, I've just been a voracious reader. I've always loved reading from as far back as I can remember. So in a way, everything inspires you. But if I had to kind of narrow it down to 2 or 3 writers, I'd always say Tolkien, for the epic, just that love of epic that he gave me. Reading his stuff gave me David Gimmel, who I first read as a teenager when his first book Legend came out in 1980 something, and his Legend there, that was the first book that I read that I stayed up all night to finish, because it was a page turner and I just had to know what happened next. And then the third person that I always mention is Bernard Cornwell, who's not a fantasy writer, he's a historical novelist, but I love historical novels as well, and I kind of step between the two genres. They're my two favorite genres to dip into. And I will not just Bernard Cornwell in general, but his series called The Warlord Chronicles, which this is book 1 here, The Winter King. And that's Bernard Cornwell's take on Arthur, on King Arthur. And I love it deeply. It's it kind of strips away all the magic, or most of the magic. There's no dragons, but there are a few supernatural events in it that could it be interpreted as magic. He leaves it a bit open, I think. But really, what he brought to his retelling of the Arthurian tale was that he wrote it as if it was history, as if it had happened. So it feels very gritty and authentic. And the battle, he's really if ever anyone asks me, he's my favourite writer of battle scenes. It's always Bernard Cornwell, and the battles in the Warlord Chronicles are just fantastically written, so like emotionally immersive, brilliant. And his character work in this series is phenomenal. You know, you will not. I don't think you'll find a better Merlin in any retelling. He's just brilliant. He's funny and grumpy, and Lancelot is just written so well. And the main character is one of Arthur's warriors. He starts off with, he's a young lad, kind of coming under Arthur's wing, and he grows up, and he's just, he's the kind of guy that you would love to have as a friend. If you could go and meet him down the pub for a pint, you'd be friends for life. It's one of those characters that really just sits in your heart. So yeah, I would always say the Warlord Chronicles, Cornwell's take on Arthur is really one of my biggest inspirations for writing.
I want to touch on two things you hit there, because first of all, you brought up David Gimmel, and I've actually gotten in trouble because of the comparisons to you and Gimmel, because I've had so many people tell me that, like, oh, if you love John Gwynne, read David Gimmel, that I've started saying that. And then people have been like, oh, you've read David Gimmel. And I'm like, no, I just know, because everyone says that. That's the proper recommendation. You sent in an email that this is one of your favorites. I went to a local bookstore to try to pick it up. They did not have it in stock, which was bad. I ordered it online, and it's getting here today. So I then had to do frantic Googling to try and learn as much about this as possible. But you brought up one of my favorite angles to this is from what I was reading, it seems it is very fantasy and minimalist, kind of more in that Abercrombie, like, yes, it's fantasy, but it's a less is more approach to fantasy, which the more I've gotten into the genre, some of the most profound utilizations of the fantastical in terms of being able to express, the ideas that maybe words can't even do justice to, right? Words are an imperfect medium of communication. That's why we love art. It can express ideas, emotions that we just can't even put into words. Is that one of the influences that you would say you've taken into your series as well? Kind of, I mean, yes, we have these gargantuan gods, but from the Bloodsworn Saga, it often feels like the fantasy is, instead of something that people have that like is a boon to their existence, it can feel like, no matter how much is a part of them or not, can almost be a bit of a curse, or like a part of a nihilistic above, like, this is just too much. What are your, I'm asking a lot here, but how do you feel about all of that?
Hey, Daniel. Maybe not quite minimalistic with giant serpents the size of a continent, but I definitely love that feeling that it's a real historical place. And that's something that I always try to bring to my writing, and I really try to give that feel to the Bloodsworn Saga. So I dived into a lot of research about Viking era history, and tried very hard to bring that feel, that Nordic sense of real space and real people, and a real culture to the books. That's as important to me as the fantastical side. I love fantasy, and so the fantastical side really is very much what those people, something that they could have believed back in that time. I mean, I haven't used the Norse gods, Thor and Odin and Loki and Tyr and all those guys, but I've made up my own version of a mythology. And the creatures that go along with that. But most of the creatures are straight out of Scandinavian folklore, creatures like Spurt, he's straight out of Scandinavian folklore, which is, it's wonderful source, really. When I was reading through it and came across this nasty little insect-like creature that lives in streams and lurks under rocks, and you can bond him to you magically by giving him a bowl of porridge mixed with a drop of blood and a bit of spit. I just thought, this has to be in the book. So they're wonderful sources. I use mythology and history, and try and write them as if it feels like a real historical place. That's the goal.
I guess that was the connective tissue I was looking for there, where you have a very grounded approach. Here's what I'll put it: it's the greatest cryptid epic of all time, where everything feels much more grounded, much more there as a part of the history. And that's beautiful to me. But we have this next question where someone took the same, what books have you been pulling from, and wanted to know if you have been influenced by the recent influx of Viking TV shows that we've seen, or there's even a comedy on Netflix right now that's apparently inspired by similar origins. And I was wondering if you've checked those out, if you appreciate all the medias that are related to the cultures that inspire you, or if it's more refined to the literature side.
No, definitely. I mean, I love the TV show Vikings, and The Last Kingdom, which is a very Viking-esque show. Which actually that's taken from Bernard's series.
Really?
Yeah, he wrote that. Yeah. That series is fantastic as well. I think there's 12 or 14 books in that series, but it's great with Uhtred of Bebbanburg. Yeah.
We have a question here. We have a question here from Royce that says, in light of recent events in the United States, all right, I like the start of that question, Royce. What advice do you have for those for creating art during hard times, when things are going poorly, when people get hurt? How do you pick yourself up? How do you sit down, and how do you create?
Oh wow! I mean, that's a hard one. I'm always loath to give advice, because I just think everyone finds their own way. In whatever we're talking about, whether it's writing or life circumstances. But for me, I just try and cling to the things that are good in my life, and focus on the positive stuff in my life, and just kind of hang in there. Just keep the focus as positive as you can. You have to be realistic as well, to quote Joe Abercrombie. But I mean, just trying to hang on to a positive mindset, I suppose. Then that's not always easy to do, as I've learned the hard way. But it's important to try and see the good.
I've had some similar thoughts coming out with some of the, especially when I was a couple of years ago, I had a really rough year, and I found myself kind of stuck more than ever. But I find writing very therapeutic. I mean, everyone's experience is going to be different, obviously, but for me, I mean, when things have even if I'm stuck just working at a problem, whether it's, one of the ways I've kind of tried to overcome writer's block is going to where I want to be, and writing back, just doing whatever I can to keep it flowing, because if I'm feeling in rough shape, it can just feel honestly better to just sit and write for 3 hours. Even if I'm stuck at the end of it, it feels like I at least exercised something building inside of me, or at least if
it's a positive thing, isn't it? Yeah, I get that.
And then we have, I think, from a question from someone you might recognize, the Brothers Gwynne. I don't know if you're familiar with their work.
That rings a bell.
It rings a small bell. I feel that we might know the answer. Oh, they're speaking we, so I think this is multiple people. But has he based any characters on people he knows? Perhaps someone in the room next over.
Yeah. It's either Ed or Will, because they've been inspirations for my two youngest sons, Ed and Will. They've been inspirations for characters in a couple of my series. Ed is there's a little bit of Ed in Civic who's a member of the Bloodsworn. Mostly because he's the funny guy. He's a great storyteller. He's witty, and he has a deep love of cheese, and that's Ed all over. And Will inspired a character of Blood and Bone, which was my second series. It was a sequel to The Faithful and the Fallen, and he inspired the character Drem, who because Will, my youngest son, he doesn't mind me talking about it, but he's on the autistic spectrum, really high functioning, and he's great at fixing tech, as you've just seen. And he's wonderful, you know. And he's just inspirational in the way he's faced life, and just met it head on. And yeah, you'd say he's a hero to me, really. So he had to be a hero in the book.
I can't let you off that easily. Has there been any negative qualities that you've written into some of the antagonists, perhaps? Maybe a character who doesn't clean their room enough or something along those lines?
Yeah, I haven't done that yet, but mate, actually, that's not a bad idea for the next series.
If this is too much, I feel free to say back off, but has there been any familial continuing of the writing tradition? Have we seen any younger Gwynnes putting forth some novel ideas?
Actually, yeah, no, that you're bang on. Ed is writing furiously. He's and I've really enjoyed what he's let me read of his so far.
Is he sticking with the Nordic theme, or are we possibly getting some cyberpunk Vikings, which I'm just putting forward?
Yeah, no, he's not Nordic. He does love. I've passed on my passion for history, I think, to Ed and Will. And James as well, my eldest son. But so yeah, this I mean, I don't know how much he'd want me to give away, but he's very passionate about the Native American culture. So it might not be a surprise if you read something of his that was part of it.
Okay. My grandpa grew up just constantly educating me on Native American culture, and it was quite depressing as a child to learn about all of that, but he just insisted, know, you need to learn about how this country came to really be. So that is an written about and underappreciated culture, especially in the fantasy space, in my opinion, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
and that's kind of a beautiful part to your process that I would love to get more into. It is an interesting way to educate people on cultures through fantasy. And I imagine occasionally you could probably even get pushback from an editor where they go, why is this detail here? That's wrong. And you have to go, well, it's important. It's something it's real. It's based in real. Whether it's the parasite that you give blood and spit to or something a bit more, culturally ceremonial. Have you had a lot of conversations with publishers about that?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And, yeah, that happens a fair bit through the kind of editorial process, and another thing that I like to do, I've tried to do with the Bloodsworn Saga, is put kind of little Norse Easter eggs in there for people that love their Norse mythology. So there'll be things like so one of the source material that I used as research was a book called the Havamal, which is the sayings of Odin, which is great. It's all these it's a bit like the book of Proverbs from the Bible, but as if it was written by Odin. So it's got a different twist to it. It's great. And one of the things that Orca says in book 1, she says, "A cleaved head no longer plots." And I remember my editor saying, this doesn't roll off the tongue very well. I think we should change the phrasing or reword this. And I was like, no, I've actually borrowed this straight from the Havamal. Odin said this, so if it's good enough for Odin, it's good enough for us. So there's quite a few of things like that will pop up in the Bloodsworn Saga.
It's kind of hard as an editor to come back to, well, a god said it.
yeah. So that was the end of that conversation, really.
Yeah. I mean, so you mentioned like the more creatures you've used and things along those lines with this cultural influence. When you put your own spin on some of this stuff, is there a measure to it where you have to restrain and go, okay, I can't change this too much? Or have you let yourself have quite a bit of leash with how much you're willing to twist and pivot these elements?
Yeah, I mean, you want it to all have the same kind of tone. A lot of the Scandinavian creatures mostly they've been written around about in kind of a more of a Christianized culture. So I've taken a lot of them and taken that side out of it and tried to make it feel more Norse, more early Norse, before Scandinavia became Christianized. So that's definitely a thing that I try to do. But and also I've a couple of the creatures that you'll find, most of them are from from Scandinavian folklore or Norse mythology, but there's a few that I've added in, thrown in myself, just because they're just creatures that came to my head, like Vesli, one of the tenor. So that wasn't out of Scandinavian folklore. I came up with them. But they were kind of, or she was my own origin story for the Tooth Fairy. Rather than this kindly fairy that will come and leave you some money under your pillow if you leave a tooth there. I came up with a creature that loves eating human teeth and would happily rip them from your gums while you're still breathing, and just to get just because she's fanatical about eating them.
That's like an actual fear of mine. So oh god.
yeah. So it's I guess once you start looking at that kind of folklore and the creatures and the tales that go along with it, then for me, I just kind of, my head started living in that world and coming up with creatures that hopefully would fit in, and be able to, and almost feel like they're in the same world, hopefully not just made up by me, but something that feels like it's got a bit more depth and root to it.
It's fascinating to see your approach to this, because a lot of the times I feel like in media, Scandinavian culture transitions into that Christian influence. So in stories like Vinland Saga, you see that very heavily, right? It's a big part of the narrative and conversation, and it's nice to see something that kind of takes that step back and is kind of just allowing that culture to breathe on its own, to exist in its own space, not in a disrespectful way to Christianity in any way, but just in a way where it's like, that doesn't always have to be a part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's quite hard to do that. Academics, a lot of the stuff I was reading was saying that everything that's written down now most of it has come from through monasteries and monks that were writing. And so it's kind of been heavily Christianized. Even Beowulf, has Christian elements in it now, but the historical theories are that the originals didn't, but we don't have them now because they were subverted through the Christianization of Scandinavia. So you have to kind of just a little bit of artistic license, I suppose, to try and imagine those stories without those aspects and try and take it back to the culture before.
Well, you've fallen into my trap, because I am very curious to hear your controversial opinions on Beowulf, and I have two different Beowulf-related questions. The first of which, there was an animated movie released. Let's not even call it the story of Beowulf. Let's call it inspired by Beowulf. Have you seen it, and what are your thoughts on it?
Are we talking about the Ray Winston?
Yes.
Voiced. Yeah, where he looked like Sean Bean.
Yes,
yeah, that one.
And the Angelina Jolie interpretation of the mother. Yeah.
I mean, I actually really enjoyed that. I thought it was a lot of fun. And I know that because Beowulf is two stories, really, isn't it? It's the first one with young Beowulf and Grendel and his mother, and then it jumps to him in a different country as an old king fighting the dragon. Mm-hmm. So, I think the animation did a good way of kind of combining those two stories and giving them more of a dramatic arc than treating them as two separate stories. I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for making the time to sit down with me today. I cannot wait to finish Fury of the Gods. I believe I'm on chapter 12. I'm not actually reading this book. I'm doing the audiobook. Your narrator is brilliant, by the way. Anyway, much appreciated. I will have links to all your books in the description down below. Oh, I also have one last question here that I think is a really good way to end this interview. For anyone who hasn't picked up your books but is very curious to get started, would you encourage them to start with the latest trilogy or go back to Malice? What would your current advice be for new readers interested in getting into the Gwynne backlog?
Okay, I mean, you could quite happily start at either end. I think it would just it would depend on what you fancy reading at the time. It's they're quite different series in that the Bloodsworn Saga is really very specifically inspired by Viking era history and Norse mythology and Scandinavian folklore. So it's kind of a you know, that it's and hopefully the tone of that kind of world is in the Bloodsworn Saga as well. So it's probably a little bit darker, a bit, you know, a little bloodier. It's a tighter, narrower focus than the Banished Lands as well, which was kind of my take on, you know, traditional epic fantasy. So it's a bigger cast, a bigger world. You know, there are themes in my writing which I hope is in there, which is, you know, family, friendship, love, loss, you know, and kind of hope. So I wouldn't say they're nihilistic works, you know, like maybe some Grimdark is. I think it's not quite there, although there's a lot of unpleasant things that go on. So, you know, I'd really say Malice or Shadow of the Gods. It just depends on what type of fantasy you want to read, and while there are common themes, there are also differences. So yeah, Viking or traditional epic fantasy. If you're in the mood for one of those, that would be the decider, I think, for me.
That sounds like a really great piece of advice to go with. My personal recommendation, if you don't mind, I don't want to supersede in any way.
No, of course.
But I personally recommend reading Shadow of the Gods purely because when you are out and about with that book, the amount of people who will ask you, what's that? That is probably one of the coolest dragons to ever adorn a cover and one of the most badass titles to complement it. So that's my way to go. You'll make a friend. I think John Gwynne books have an uncanny ability to get you to make a friend.
Well, that's great to hear. The covers are just... I got so lucky with Marcus. Just turned out so well. I love them.
I'll have their credit on screen as well, so people can check out their catalog of art, which I've actually done. Cool. And holy crap, worth it. Definitely a fantasy artist who I hope continues to have covers coming out left, right, up, and down. Yeah. Thank you so much. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And buy John Gwynne's books. You will not regret it.
Thanks for the invite, Daniel. It's really, really been lovely to talk to you again.
You
take care.